The night they found out was the same night they laughed at me. I was standing in my parents' dining room, holding a chipped ceramic plate, while my uncle joked that I was the family IT guy, the one who fixes printers and installs antivirus software. My cousins were scrolling on their phones, barely looking up, smirking when someone asked if I was still doing that little coding thing from my bedroom. And then my phone rang. It was the CEO of a trillion-dollar tech company, on speaker, in front of everyone, and his first words were, "We finally deployed your architecture globally. You just changed the future of AI." The room went silent. But let me take you back, because betrayal doesn't start with a phone call. It starts with laughter. Welcome to my YouTube channel. This is my story of betrayal, and if you've ever trusted the wrong person, hit that subscribe button because you are not alone. Here is how it happened. I was reading comments on my YouTube videos the other day, and I realized I wasn't the only one who had been underestimated by the very people who were supposed to believe in us. The quiet ones, the builders, the dreamers working behind closed doors while the world rolled its eyes. This is for you. I didn't grow up rich. I didn't grow up connected. What I had was an old secondhand laptop that overheated so badly I had to prop it up with 2 textbooks just to keep it alive. While my cousins posted vacation photos from Dubai and London, I was in my room teaching myself machine learning from free PDFs and outdated YouTube tutorials. They called it a phase. My father called it screen addiction. My aunt once said in front of everyone, "At least he's not unemployed, even if no one knows what he actually does." It was always said with that half laugh, that polite humiliation disguised as humor, and I smiled through it every single time. Because explaining AI infrastructure to people who measure success in visible status symbols is like explaining gravity to someone floating in denial. They don't want to understand, they just want to judge. Still, I kept building. At 2:13 a.m. most nights while the house slept, I was designing neural network optimization layers for distributed systems no one around me even knew existed. I contributed anonymously to open-source projects. I solved back-end inefficiencies for startups who couldn't afford Silicon Valley engineers. They never asked who I was. They just cared that it worked. But family? Family cared about appearances. My cousin Armand worked in finance. That's how everyone introduced him. Finance. Clean, respectable, impressive. No one knew exactly what he did, but he wore suits and drove a leased BMW, so it counted. Me? I work remotely. That phrase alone made people uncomfortable. At weddings, relatives would lean in and whisper, "So, when are you getting a real job?" And I'd nod politely because correcting them felt exhausting. What they didn't know was that 6 months earlier, I had been approached through GitHub by a private research division affiliated with one of the largest AI companies in the world. They didn't care about my degree. They cared about a compression algorithm I'd built that reduced model training costs by 37%. 37%. In AI infrastructure, that's not a small tweak. That's war-level advantage. They offered me a contract, quiet, confidential, heavily restricted. I couldn't post about it. I couldn't brag. I couldn't even update LinkedIn. So, to my family, I was still on the computer. The jokes got louder when I skipped a cousin's engagement party because I had a deployment deadline. My aunt announced to the room, "He's coding something very important for NASA, I'm sure." Everyone laughed. I laughed too. But something shifted that night because Armand pulled me aside and said, "Listen, man, you're smart, but you need visibility. No one respects what they can't see." Visibility. That word haunted me because the company I was working with had just entered negotiations with a global conglomerate, a trillion-dollar client looking to integrate advanced AI automation across logistics, defense, finance, everything. And the backbone architecture they were reviewing? Mine. But I couldn't tell anyone, not when NDAs could financially destroy me. So I swallowed it. Swallowed every joke, every subtle dig, every "when are you growing up?" Until the dinner. The dinner where my uncle decided to toast the successful children of the family. He named Armand. He named my cousin Sarah, who had married into money. He skipped me. Then he laughed and said, "And of course we have our future Mark Zuckerberg here, still coding in his pajamas." The table erupted, and right as I forced that tight smile again, my phone vibrated. Unknown number, Silicon Valley area code. I almost declined it, but something in my chest told me not to. I answered, "Hello?" A calm voice replied, "Is this the lead systems architect behind the Helios compression framework?" I felt my pulse in my throat. "Yes." A pause. Then the sentence that would fracture everything. "We have finally deployed your global infrastructure. You just changed the future of AI. The global client wants to speak with you." My family was still laughing. And the CEO said, "We're putting you on speaker." I slowly lifted my phone. And that's when everything changed. I didn't warn them. I didn't clear my throat or ask for silence. I just tapped the screen and placed the phone in the center of the dining table. The laughter faded, not because they knew what was happening, but because my expression changed. For the first time in years, I wasn't smiling through it. A deep, controlled voice filled the room. "Good evening. This is Daniel Reeves, CEO of Novacore Technologies." You could feel the shift in oxygen. Even as my relatives didn't recognize the name immediately, they recognized authority, the tone, the confidence, the kind of voice that moves markets. My uncle's smirk faltered. Armand straightened in his chair. The CEO continued, "We wanted to personally thank you for the Helios framework. Our trillion-dollar partner has confirmed that your compression architecture reduced their projected infrastructure cost by $4.8 billion over the next 5 years. $4.8 billion. The number didn't just land, it detonated. My mother blinked at me like she was seeing a stranger. Someone at the table nervously laughed, assuming it had to be a joke. It wasn't. Daniel continued, "The board would like to discuss expanding your leadership role. We're prepared to formalize equity." Equity. That word hit harder than the money, because equity meant ownership. Ownership meant permanence, and permanence meant I was no longer the invisible kid coding in a bedroom. I was infrastructure. My uncle leaned forward. "Is this real?" I didn't answer him. Instead, I spoke into the phone. Calm, measured. "I appreciate the trust, but I want clarity on autonomy and architectural control." The CEO didn't hesitate. "You'll have it." And that's when something inside me snapped into alignment. For years, I had shrunk myself to make other people comfortable. For years, I had let them define my value based on what they understood. But power doesn't announce itself loudly. It builds quietly, and then it speaks once. When the call ended, the silence was unbearable. No one laughed, no one joked. They just stared. Armand finally broke it. "Wait, Novacore? As in the Novacore?" I nodded. He pulled out his phone, typing frantically. My aunt whispered, "That's the company that just partnered with—" "Yes," I said gently, "them." The trillion-dollar conglomerate everyone had been reading about in business headlines for months, the one reshaping global AI infrastructure, the one whose back end now ran on something I built at 2 a.m. in a dark bedroom with an overheating laptop. My father looked at me differently. Not proud, not yet, confused. "Why didn't you tell us?" There it was. The question that always comes after revelation: why didn't you tell us? Because you never listened. Because you laughed. Because every time I tried to explain, you reduced it to computer stuff. But I didn't say that. I simply replied, "You never asked." And that sentence hung heavier than the billions. Dinner ended awkwardly. No one toasted, no one joked. They suddenly needed air. But the shift wasn't just external, it was internal. Because something dangerous happens when people who underestimated you suddenly realize your value. They start recalculating their proximity. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls, all from family. Armand texted first. "Bro, we should talk. There might be opportunities to collaborate." Collaborate. Interesting word choice from someone who told me visibility mattered more than skill. My aunt sent a long message saying she always believed in me. Always. I scrolled back through years of subtle digs. Always is a flexible word. My father knocked on my bedroom door for the first time in months without criticizing the late-night screen time. He sat on the edge of my bed and asked me to explain what I actually did. So I did. I explained distributed computing clusters. I explained neural network optimization layers. I explained why reducing training costs at scale changes the economics of AI globally. He didn't understand all of it, but he listened. For the first time, he listened. And that almost broke me more than the laughter ever did. Because validation after humiliation feels complicated. It's satisfying, but it's also heavy. Over the next few weeks, my life accelerated. Contracts were formalized, equity agreements signed, security briefings conducted. I flew out to meet the trillion-dollar client's executive board. Walking into that glass skyscraper lobby felt surreal. The same kid who was mocked for playing on computers was now discussing global AI deployment strategies with executives who controlled industries. One of them, a silver-haired board member, looked at me and said, "You're younger than we expected." I smiled. I get that a lot. But here's what no one saw: the pressure. Because when your work scales globally, mistakes don't stay small. A miscalculation doesn't crash a laptop, it shifts markets. And somewhere in that expansion, I noticed something unsettling: internal resistance. Not from the trillion-dollar client, from within Novacore itself. There were senior engineers who didn't like that an external contractor, a relatively unknown one, had architected the core compression layer. I started receiving passive-aggressive feedback, requests for unnecessary audits, subtle delays. Someone wanted control, and control in trillion-dollar ecosystems equals power. One night, reviewing deployment logs, I noticed anomalies, tiny deviations in performance metrics. At first glance, they looked like harmless inefficiencies, but I knew my system too well. Someone was altering submodules. Not enough to break it, just enough to weaken it, to make it seem unstable. My stomach dropped, because if Helios failed at global scale, the blame would fall on me, the bedroom coder, not the internal politics, not the sabotage, me. And suddenly, the laughter at family dinners didn't matter anymore. This was bigger. This was corporate warfare disguised as optimization. I traced the access logs, encrypted credentials, senior-level clearance. This wasn't a random engineer. This was someone high enough to think they were untouchable. I didn't confront anyone. Not yet. Instead, I built a silent patch, a monitoring layer embedded invisibly within the framework, a digital fingerprinting system that would log every micro-adjustment in real time. If they wanted to play games inside my architecture, they were about to be recorded doing it. But what I didn't realize, what I couldn't have predicted, was that the sabotage wasn't just professional, it was personal. Because the name attached to the access logs was someone connected to my family, and when I saw it, my hands started shaking. The name on the logs stared back at me like a punch. It was Armin, my cousin, the one who lectured me about visibility, the one who laughed when my work was dismissed, the one who suddenly wanted to collaborate. I stared at the screen for minutes. The cursor blinked at me as if mocking the realization. My heart raced, and a cold sweat formed on my palms. Betrayal, I thought, doesn't always come from strangers. Sometimes it comes from those closest to you. I backed up my findings, encrypted everything, and stepped away from my desk. I needed clarity, not anger. But clarity was impossible with family suddenly hovering over my shoulder, feigning curiosity, feigning concern. The next dinner was tense. My parents tried small talk. My aunt asked about the big company stuff. And Armin? He smiled, too casually, too smoothly. "So, how's the work at Novacore?" he asked, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed. I met his eyes, trying to hide the storm inside me. "Busy. The Helios deployment is global now. It's delicate work." "Delicate," he laughed lightly, a sound that made my blood boil. "Sounds like you're doing very well for yourself." Very well. Yes, I was. But the question was, at what cost? I left dinner early, telling them I had a conference call. My apartment was dark, the laptop's glow the only light. I pulled up the logs again. Every timestamp, every subtle edit, every forced delay pointed back to him. Armin had been siphoning minor tweaks, no catastrophic failures, just enough to make the system appear unstable in certain regions. That instability would create doubt among Novacore's internal leadership, and doubt at that level is a weapon. I remembered his lecture, "No one respects what they can't see." He wasn't aiming to destroy me outright. He was shaping perception. To him, visibility meant recognition, and he was trying to take it away. I thought back to the family gatherings, the jokes, the laughter at my bedroom coding. Every moment now seemed like a rehearsal, every slight, every condescending comment a step in a larger play. I realized then I had underestimated him, and maybe I had underestimated how far betrayal can travel through bloodlines. I called my lead contact at Novacore, carefully. I didn't mention Armin, not yet. I simply outlined anomalies and offered to run diagnostics remotely. They trusted me. They had to. Helios was my architecture. Over the next week, I dug deeper, tracing every tweak, every code commit. Armin wasn't acting alone. There were others, a small faction within Novacore's engineering team, sympathetic to him, people who saw an outsider kid as a threat. The more I uncovered, the more dangerous it became. If I acted too soon, they could cover their tracks. If I acted too late, Helios's deployment could be compromised. And compromise at that scale wouldn't just ruin my reputation, it could cost billions, destabilize markets, and worst of all, feed Armin the recognition he craved. I set up surveillance protocols, silent monitors, encrypted logs. Every edit would be captured, time-stamped, and stored securely. I became the ghost in my own system, watching the people who thought they were ghosts themselves. Then came the first confrontation. It was a late Friday night, and Armin had stopped replying to texts. Suspicious. I decided to drop by his office under the guise of casual curiosity. The door was slightly ajar. Inside, Armin was on his laptop coding, not random work. This was Helios, my Helios. He didn't notice me at first, and when he did, I saw that familiar smirk, the one that had haunted my family dinners for years. "What are you doing here?" he asked casually, masking panic with charm. "Checking on my deployment," I replied, calm, too calm. He laughed, not in relief. He was laughing to buy time. I stepped closer. "I've been reviewing the logs. I know what you've been doing." His eyes flickered, a micro-expression, guilt, anger, surprise, all in less than a second. "You don't understand," he started, but I cut him off. "Oh, I understand perfectly. You want credit, you want visibility, and you're willing to sabotage me to get it." His smirk faltered. It's complicated." "Complicated," I echoed, voice low. "You attempted to manipulate a system that runs globally. Do you even understand the scale of what you're playing with?" He hesitated. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as if deciding whether to flee, delete, or continue. I thought you were invisible," he said finally. "I thought no one would notice, and I wanted to be seen." Betrayal, ego, greed, so many emotions tangled in a single admission. "I noticed," I said, and my hands didn't shake, my voice didn't rise. That night, I left his office with more than just confirmation. I left with resolute, because I realized that visibility, power, and recognition aren't just about showing the world what you've built. They're about protecting it. And protecting it means making difficult choices. The next day, I presented my findings to Novacore's executive board. Every subtle adjustment, every delay, every unauthorized access, each file time-stamped, each edit recorded. They were silent. Their eyes moved from the screen to me and then to each other. One of the senior board members, a stern woman with silver-framed glasses, leaned forward. "You're certain of this?" "Absolutely," I said. "I have proof." They paused, calculated, and then, quietly, they said, "We'll handle it." I knew what that meant: legal action, internal audits, and most importantly, the isolation of Armin's faction. But what they didn't know, what I hadn't revealed, was my next move. Because in betrayal, timing is everything. I could have exposed him to family first, humiliated him like he tried to humiliate me, but I didn't. Not yet. I wanted leverage, strategy, power. I wanted to make sure that when he fell into a system he couldn't manipulate. Over the next few weeks, I stayed quiet publicly, working late nights, refining Helios' security protocols, embedding layers that would make unauthorized changes impossible without immediate detection. At family events, I smiled, I joked, I nodded at their questions. I played the role they expected. But inside, I was preparing. Because what they didn't understand, what no one outside the system could, is that I wasn't just protecting my code. I was protecting my life's work. And when betrayal comes from blood, revenge isn't just personal, it's inevitable. I remember that night vividly. I sat alone in my apartment, looking at the city lights, the same city that had ignored me, dismissed me, laughed at me. And I whispered to myself, "You wanted visibility, Armin. Let's see how visible I can make you." That's when the real game began. I had spent years building invisible foundations, and now, finally, those foundations were my shield and my weapon. The first step was patience. I couldn't rush, not with $1 trillion client watching, not with Novacore's internal politics at play. Every move had to be precise, calculated, leaving nothing to chance. I had learned the hard way that visibility attracts envy, and envy often hides behind smiles. Armin tried subtlety at first, emails marked urgent that were actually traps, requests to reroute deployment modules for efficiency that would have forced a rollback. Minor delays meant to make me sweat, to make the board question my competence. I noticed every one of them. I traced them. I recorded them. And I waited. Because patience, in betrayal, is the deadliest weapon. At the same time, I had to maintain appearances at home. My family still believed I was just coding. They still underestimated me. I smiled at casual questions. I nodded at their advice. I even laughed at some of their jokes, all the while knowing the truth. The tension was delicious in its own way. Armin didn't know I was aware. He thought he was orchestrating a silent coup, carving a space for himself inside my success. But in reality, he was playing right into my hands. I remember the day it all tipped. It was a Thursday. I had been running a deep audit on Helios's distributed clusters. Something in the metrics caught my eye. Minor anomalies, small timing discrepancies in data packets, minute enough that the untrained eye wouldn't see, but I saw, and I traced it. Armin had made a critical error. arrogance. He left a digital footprint, subtle but unmistakable. The realization made my stomach tighten, not because I was angry, not yet, but because I knew that with this, I had control. Control over exposure, control over narrative, control over consequences. I didn't act immediately. I let it simmer, observing patterns, mapping behavior, confirming that no one else was involved. And then I decided to escalate, silently. I sent a secure report to Novacore's compliance office. Not just the anomalies, not just the suspicious access. I included a full forensic analysis of timestamps, access privileges, and even internal communications that hinted at collaboration among Armand's faction. The board responded quickly, swift, surgical. They initiated internal audits, immediate isolation of suspicious accounts, all access revoked. Armand? He had no idea. He thought the system was failing because of minor technical glitches, that his subtle sabotage was unnoticed. And while he scrambled, I continued to refine Helios, embedding redundancies, security layers that would render unauthorized edits detectable immediately. Every system checkpoint now had my fingerprint, invisible but unbreakable. And the irony wasn't lost on me. The same family who mocked me for playing on a computer was now completely dependent on the architecture I had designed. At home, they were beginning to notice subtle changes. My father asked me about how the software affects global shipping routes. My uncle casually mentioned, "Your system is making headlines in the business section." My cousins, who once laughed at me, were now quoting tech blogs where Helios's optimization framework was being hailed as revolutionary. And Armand? He tried to keep up, forced casual references in conversation, hints about his own projects and collaborations, but no one listened, not anymore. I had achieved something deeper than success. I had achieved autonomy, respect, recognition, and now the game was about leverage. I had to decide how to approach Armand, publicly, privately, humiliate him before the family, or quietly, ensuring that his professional credibility was the one thing that crumbled. I chose patience again, because when betrayal is personal, revenge is most effective when calculated. I remember that night clearly. The office was dark, the city lights reflected on the windows. I reviewed Helios's monitoring logs one last time before leaving. Armand had tried one final subtle edit, tweaking a minor cluster. I smiled. Everything was documented, every micro movement, every attempt at interference. I took screenshots, timestamps, notes, every single proof of his intent preserved in a secure archive. And then I called Novacore's legal counsel, not to act yet, just to confirm protocol. "Yes," she said calmly, "we have everything we need, and with your documentation, the internal investigation will be airtight." I hung up and exhaled slowly, because the truth about betrayal isn't just about catching someone, it's about timing. It's about making sure that when the reveal happens, it's undeniable. Meanwhile, Armand continued acting like nothing had changed. He tried small manipulations, subtle hints, casual boasts, and each time I silently smiled. Each time I let him believe he had the upper hand. I watched him from the sidelines, noting every behavior, every conversation, every attempt at influence. And the more I watched, the clearer it became. He underestimated me in every possible way, which, in retrospect, was his greatest mistake. One morning, my mother called me, sounding more curious than cautious. "You've changed. You're different, more confident, more alive." I paused. That word, alive, struck me. She had never seen me this way, never recognized the intensity, the focus, the drive behind what they once dismissed as just coding. "I've been learning," I said softly. She laughed. "That's an understatement." And she was right. Learning, not just coding, not just building systems, but learning patience, observation, strategy, and the subtle art of influence. because technology alone doesn't protect you. People and the power of human behavior are just as critical. Over the following weeks, Helios's deployment reached full operational scale. Minor clusters in Europe, Asia, and North America were optimized, redundancies integrated, and unauthorized edits were blocked automatically. Performance metrics exceeded projections. The client was ecstatic. Novacore's reputation soared. And Armand? He was exposed incrementally, first internally by the board's investigation, which referenced discrepancies only I could trace, then professionally, as other teams questioned his competence. His attempts to claim visibility backfired spectacularly. Family gatherings became strange theaters. My relatives whispered, eyes darted towards me. Armand tried to act normal, tried to re-establish rapport, but the underlying tension was palpable. And I realized something profound. Power isn't about proving people wrong. It's about building a position so undeniable that they have no choice but to acknowledge it. Armand never apologized, not once. But I didn't need that, because betrayal, in its purest form, is a mirror, and the reflection he saw, a version of me stronger, smarter, and untouchable, was punishment enough. Late one night, I sat alone in the office reviewing Helios's monitoring logs one last time before leaving. Armand had tried one final subtle edit, tweaking a minor cluster. I smiled. Everything was documented, every micro movement, every attempt at interference. I took screenshots, timestamps, notes, every single proof of his intent preserved in a secure archive. And then I called Novacore's legal counsel, not to act yet, just to confirm protocol. Yes, she said calmly, we have everything we need, and with your documentation, the internal investigation will be airtight. I hung up and exhaled slowly, because the truth about betrayal isn't just about catching someone, it's about timing. It's about making sure that when the reveal happens, it's undeniable. Meanwhile, Armand continued acting like nothing had changed. He tried small manipulations, subtle hints, casual boasts, and each time I silently smiled. Each time I let him believe he had the upper hand. I watched him from the sidelines, noting every behavior, every conversation, every attempt at influence. And the more I watched, the clearer it became. He underestimated me in every possible way, which, in retrospect, was his greatest mistake. One morning, my mother called me, sounding more curious than cautious. "You've changed. You're different, more confident, more alive." I paused. That word, alive, struck me. She had never seen me this way, never recognized the intensity, the focus, the drive behind what they once dismissed as just coding. "I've been learning," I said softly. She laughed. "That's an understatement." And she was right. Learning, not just coding, not just building systems, but learning patience, observation, strategy, and the subtle art of influence. Because technology alone doesn't protect you. People and the power of human behavior are just as critical. Over the following weeks, Helios's deployment reached full operational scale. Minor clusters in Europe, Asia, and North America were optimized, redundancies integrated, and unauthorized edits were blocked automatically. Performance metrics exceeded projections. The client was ecstatic. Novacore's reputation soared. The weeks after the internal report were surreal. Armand vanished professionally almost overnight. Novacore revoked his credentials, and the board's censure was more thorough than I had imagined. Emails, memos, and compliance documents all documented his sabotage in black and white. There was no room for ambiguity, no room for him to claim ignorance or blame anyone else. And yet, the family's reaction was the hardest to navigate. Dinner invitations dwindled, calls went unanswered. My mother sent vague texts about hoping everything settles soon. My father avoided eye contact. And Armand? He started showing up at family events again, this time quieter, almost apologetic, though his arrogance still peeked through in small gestures. I learned quickly that exposing betrayal within your own bloodline doesn't feel like victory. It feels lonely. The people who once dismissed you now walk on eggshells around you. They whisper, they speculate, and you realize that respect, when it comes late, is often fraught with envy and discomfort. But I had a mission, and mission comes before sentiment. Helios was scaling. The trillion-dollar client had signed off on global integration. Entire systems in logistics, finance, and energy were now running on my framework. My code wasn't just a project anymore. It was the backbone of real-world industry. One night, I received a message from a Novacore executive. Global deployment achieved. Client ecstatic, board requests your presence for strategic planning and wishes to discuss recognition formally. Recognition. That word had once felt empty. Now it carried weight. Equity, title, authority. These weren't just symbols. They were validation that all those late nights, all that invisibility had mattered. But as I prepared for the board meeting, a nagging thought lingered. Armand wasn't gone. He may have been professionally isolated, but family ties meant he wasn't entirely cut off. And people like him don't disappear quietly. They wait, they observe, they learn from their mistakes. I needed a strategy. At the meeting, the board was as intense as ever. They congratulated me, outlined the formal recognition plan, and, subtly, hinted at future leadership opportunities within the company. My role wasn't going to be just as a contractor. I would now guide the direction of Helios, shape its architecture for the next decade. I listened, nodded, smiled, but internally I was already planning. Because success without preparation is fragile, and I had learned that betrayal can come from anywhere, even the most familiar faces. The next few weeks, I immersed myself deeper into Helios. I upgraded security protocols, built autonomous monitoring systems, and established redundant fail-safes. Every anomaly, every potential breach was accounted for. If someone like Armand ever tried again, it wouldn't just be recorded, it would be impossible to execute without detection. Meanwhile, family dynamics remained tense. Conversations were clipped, invitations avoided, and every small interaction with Armand felt like a test. Who would blink first? Who would show weakness? Who would break? He tried subtly, compliments thinly veiled as observations, small nudges toward collaboration in family matters, attempts to reclaim some visibility. I ignored them all. I had learned the power of silence, the power of observation, the power of patience. One evening, my mother asked me why I seemed so calm, so composed despite everything. I've learned to see the whole board, not just the pieces moving in front of me. She frowned, confused, but didn't push further. Some lessons are learned through observation, not explanation. Then came the day I decided to solidify the outcome. I scheduled a formal session with Novacore's HR and legal teams. I presented a concise, airtight dossier documenting Armand's sabotage, every timestamp, every modification, every attempt at interference. The verdict was swift: termination, public censure, no possibility of reinstatement, professional references revoked, and, crucially, a note added to internal records that ensured no future internal team could unknowingly allow him access to any sensitive project. I left the session exhausted, drained, but also strangely free. The tension had lifted, Helios was secure, Armand's interference neutralized, and yet a part of me felt empty. Betrayal leaves a residue that success cannot wash away. You win the war, but the scars remain. The people who once doubted you, mocked you, or betrayed you, their faces linger, their voices echo, and every family gathering carries the subtle undertone of "remember when?" I tried to navigate that with grace, smiling when appropriate, laughing at jokes, participating in events, but the quiet knowledge of my victory lingered beneath the surface. It was a new kind of power, not loud, not boastful, but undeniable. Weeks turned to months, Helios continued to grow, recognition came externally, awards, mentions in industry journals, invitations to speak at conferences, and internally, within Novacore, my influence expanded. I was no longer just a coder, I was a strategist, a leader, a force to be acknowledged. Armand's presence faded, but occasionally I'd catch glimpses, a lingering look, a comment, a text that seemed casual but carried undercurrents of regret or envy. And I realized victory isn't just about removing the threat, it's about becoming untouchable while they realize their mistakes. The culmination of all this was an invitation to present Helios's achievements at an international AI summit. Lights, cameras, applause, a stage that I had once only dreamed of. As I walked to the podium, I thought back to that dining room, the laughter, the jokes, the dismissals, and I felt a quiet satisfaction, not just for proving my worth, but for surviving, for turning ridicule and betrayal into a platform that no one could ignore. The speech was brief, yet powerful. I spoke about innovation, resilience, and the quiet work that goes unnoticed until it shapes the world. The audience applauded, unaware of the personal battles that had paved the way. And as I stepped down, I felt it, the weight of everything behind me. The invisible coder had become visible. The betrayed had become the triumphant. But the story wasn't just mine. It was for every person who had been underestimated, overlooked, mocked, dismissed, who had quietly worked, learned, and persisted while the world laughed. Because in the end, success isn't just about talent, it's about endurance, strategy, and the unshakable belief that your worth isn't defined by the eyes that refuse to see it. And in that moment, I understood something profound. Betrayal can fuel greatness, laughter can sharpen resolve, and invisibility can, with the right timing, become power that no one can ignore. The game with Armand was over, the deployment was global, recognition was formalized, and yet a subtle lesson lingered. Trust cautiously, observe constantly, and never underestimate the quiet ones. Because the invisible coder doesn't just survive, he thrives. And the next challenge, the next betrayal, the next unexpected twist, it would come. I knew that. But now I was ready. I was untouchable. And finally, seen. The weeks that followed were a mix of triumph and tension. Globally, Helios was performing beyond expectations. Clients were ecstatic. Novacore's stock was stabilizing after years of volatility, and headlines hailed the innovative compression framework that had cut costs and boosted efficiency across industries. My name wasn't on the front page yet, but internally it carried weight. Every board meeting, every strategic decision referenced the architecture I had built. And yet, behind the accolades, the tension never fully dissipated, because power, once acquired, attracts scrutiny. The more I became integral to Novacore, the more invisible adversaries emerged. Some were new, ambitious engineers eager to make a mark, unaware of my capabilities. Others were remnants of Armand's faction, quietly observing, waiting for a misstep. I noticed small things first, requests for system logs that weren't routine, meetings that seemed casual but carried undertones of evaluation, passive-aggressive comments in internal channels. Every subtle action was like a ripple across water, barely noticeable at first, but capable of escalating into a storm. One night, reviewing Helios's deployment in Asia, I noticed an anomaly. A cluster in Singapore showed slight latency spikes during peak operations. Normally, Helios handled global traffic efficiently, but these micro spikes were unusual. I dug deeper. At first, it seemed minor, almost imperceptible, but Helios's global monitoring architecture allowed me to trace even sub-millisecond fluctuations, and what I found sent a chill down my spine. The edits weren't random. Someone was actively testing the system, probing for weaknesses, not to crash it, not yet, just enough to observe, to map patterns, to find entry points. And the name tied to these probes wasn't entirely unfamiliar. It wasn't Armin, not directly. It was someone who had been quiet, patient, and intelligent enough to avoid detection, a senior engineer who had survived Armin's downfall and had quietly regained access to sensitive modules under the guise of routine operations. I realized immediately this was a different kind of battle. Armin had been reckless, emotional, predictable, but this new player was calculated, methodical, and patient. And patience, when paired with access to global systems, is dangerous. I spent days tracking every micro-movement, every code commit, every timestamp, every session login. My apartment became a war room. Screens lined the walls. Monitoring logs scrolled endlessly. Coffee cups multiplied. Sleep became a fragmented concept. But amidst the intensity, I also understood the subtle advantage I had. I knew Helios better than anyone. Every dependency, every subroutine, every hidden trigger. It was my architecture, my creation. And I had already built defenses for scenarios like this: silent monitoring protocols, encrypted audit logs, and anomaly detection layers that could flag deviations at sub-millisecond resolution. The next step was strategy. I couldn't act emotionally. I couldn't rush. Mistakes at this level could have global consequences. I had to bait, observe, and trap. So I allowed the probe to continue, subtly tracing its origins, documenting behavior, mapping patterns. Every tested ran, every unauthorized read or modification was captured. I became the invisible observer, the ghost in the system, watching the predator reveal itself. Days passed. The probes grew bolder, testing new clusters, exploring different pathways. And with each movement, the digital fingerprints accumulated. Patterns emerged. A signature, a digital heartbeat unique to this individual. I realized then that Helios wasn't just a framework. It was a weapon, a shield, a mirror. Every attempt to undermine it reflected back on the saboteur, and I intended to use that mirror strategically. Meanwhile, the human element played out in parallel. Family dynamics remained tense. Armin had mostly withdrawn, though occasional glances at me betrayed lingering resentment. My parents were quieter, uncertain how to navigate the new power balance, and the board at Novacore remained trusting but watchful, relying on my guidance without fully understanding the scale of the silent battle unfolding within their systems. Then came the breakthrough. The probe made a critical misstep, a login attempt during an unusual time using deprecated credentials. The monitoring layer flagged it immediately. I traced the IP address, session logs, and compiled the full history of suspicious activity. The evidence was undeniable. The individual behind the probe was someone I had underestimated, someone whose loyalty had always been ambiguous. They had been patient, observing, waiting for the right moment to test Helios's resilience, but their patience had become their downfall. I reported my findings to Novacore's internal security team. Every detail, every timestamp, every micro-movement meticulously documented. They acted quickly, isolating the engineer and revoking all access. Immediate audits confirmed no damage had been done, but the implications were clear. The system could have been compromised if the probe had continued. In the aftermath, I reflected on the lessons. Betrayal isn't always immediate or overt. Sometimes it's slow, subtle, almost imperceptible, and the stakes of overlooking it, especially at a global scale, are catastrophic. But I also realized the most powerful tool I had wasn't Helios itself. It was foresight, observation, patience, the ability to remain calm, to document, and to act decisively when the moment demanded. That evening, I sat alone in the office, looking at the global dashboard. Lights blinked across continents, data flowed seamlessly, no latency spikes, no anomalies, no unauthorized probes. Helios was secure. My victory was complete, at least for now. And yet, a quiet thought lingered in the back of my mind. The next betrayal could come from anywhere, not just Armin, not just disaffected engineers. It could be anyone, anywhere, who underestimated the quiet coder who had once been mocked, dismissed, and overlooked. I smiled, because I was ready. I hadn't built more than code. I had built resilience, strategy, influence, power. And in the world of invisible threats, that was the ultimate advantage. Helios thrived. Recognition followed. My name circulated among industry circles. Invitations for collaboration, mentorship, and leadership roles poured in. But the game of trust, betrayal, and vigilance continued quietly beneath the surface, like the currents beneath a calm ocean. I had learned that being visible isn't enough. Being untouchable is a choice. It's calculated, patient, strategic. And as I closed my laptop that night, the city lights reflecting on the windows, I knew the lesson had been internalized. In a world where betrayal lurks even among family, the quiet coder is the one who survives and thrives by observing, documenting, and acting only when the timing is perfect. The real battle, I realized, isn't just about coding, recognition, or victory. It's about mastering the unseen, controlling perception, and shaping outcomes without others realizing you're playing the game at all. And that mastery, that is ultimate power. The calm was deceptive. For months, I had believed that the battles were behind me, that the exposure of Armen and the neutralization of the probe had secured both Helios and my position. But I was wrong. It started subtly. Anomalies in Helios's performance metrics, tiny spikes in latency, negligible at first, almost imperceptible. Then, minor inconsistencies in data reporting, nothing catastrophic, yet enough to trigger my instincts. I stayed late that night, the city skyline dark behind me, the glow of monitors painting the room in shades of green and blue. Every microsecond of Helios's activity streamed before me. I cross-referenced logs, timestamps, and access histories, and then I saw it. A familiar signature. Not Armin, not the engineer I had recently caught. This was someone else, someone who had infiltrated Helios's framework in a way no one should have been able to. And the traces were deliberate, almost theatrical, as if the intruder wanted to be discovered, to test me. The reality hit me like a freight train. The threat wasn't just technical, it was personal. Someone was challenging me, my intellect, my control, my ability to anticipate moves I hadn't even considered. I pulled up the system logs in granular detail, every access point, every deviation from the baseline, every hidden dependency touched, and the pattern became clear. The intruder was clever, surgical, but they weren't infallible. They left fingerprints, subtle, encoded hints embedded in the metadata. Someone brilliant, perhaps equally obsessed with Helios as I was, someone who saw it as a challenge rather than a tool. I realized then this was no longer just about Armin, family, or recognition. This was about survival. And the first rule of survival and betrayal is anticipation. I activated the most advanced monitoring protocols I had built, adaptive AI routines, anomaly detection algorithms, automated response measures. Everything Helios had learned about itself was now being used to track the intruder. For hours, I traced the digital footprint. It was like a high-stakes chess game. Every probe, every test, every attempt to access sensitive modules was met with silent countermeasures. Each move I made was invisible to the intruder, yet calculated to gather maximum intelligence. And then the first overt attack happened. a cascade of simultaneous edits across multiple clusters. Helios's global optimization routines were being tested aggressively. I watched, my heart rate spiking, as the system detected each unauthorized attempt and neutralized it instantly. Alerts flashed, logs recorded every move. And I realized something critical. This was someone who had studied me, Helios, and my approach. They weren't just trying to breach the system, they were trying to provoke me to see if I would make a mistake. I leaned back in my chair, fingers poised over the keyboard, and felt the familiar rush of adrenaline, the kind I had experienced during Armin's sabotage, but amplified, higher stakes, faster reactions, more pressure. Then came a message, encrypted, anonymous. Impressive, but can you see everything? It was audacious, personal, a direct challenge. I responded silently, with analysis, setting traps within Helios's virtual environment, honeypot nodes, decoy clusters, fake data streams designed to lure the intruder into exposure. Hours passed, the intruder bit, their movements became reckless, patterns that were once subtle became apparent, and for the first time I could trace their physical origin, or at least their network. The tension was unbearable. Every second, every micro-decision could determine the outcome. A misstep, and the global deployment could falter, Helios could be compromised, and my career, my work would be at risk. I considered going to Novacore, alerting legal or security teams, but I realized that anyone else stepping in would alert the intruder. I needed to finish this alone. I initiated a countermeasure, a trap built deep within Helios's architecture. It was subtle, harmless to the system, but it would flag and trace the intruder's actions in real time, creating a virtual signature they couldn't erase. And then I waited. Minutes stretched into hours, each spike in activity, each anomalous access attempt was tracked, analyzed, and countered. The intruder tried different angles, probing redundancies, testing fail-safes, seeking weaknesses in both code and logic. And then I saw it, a fatal misstep. A probe that interacted with a honeypot node I had designed specifically for this scenario. Metadata leaked, access attempted through a back door I never publicly documented. I traced the connection instantly. IPs, encrypted layers, timestamps, device fingerprints. The intruder had revealed themselves. And I recognized the signature. It was someone from my past, someone who had once worked alongside Armand, someone who had been quietly observing, someone who had bided their time, waiting for the right moment. The realization hit me like a lightning bolt. The betrayal was deeper than I had imagined. The web was larger, more intricate, more personal. I had the intruder cornered in the digital world, but the question remained, what were their motives? Were they testing Helios for personal gain, professional recognition, or something darker, more destructive? Every instinct screamed caution. Every memory of Armin's sabotage reminded me that arrogance and underestimation could be fatal. I devised a plan. I would lure them further, make them believe they had an advantage. Every move, every calculation, every response would be part of a larger strategy, to not just stop the intrusion, but to expose it completely. I watched the intruder engage with the decoy nodes, completely unaware of the surveillance I had built, and then I began mapping the escalation, predicting their next moves, setting digital tripwires, preparing countermeasures that would isolate them entirely within Helios's sandboxed environment. Hours passed. The tension built like a pressure cooker. Each notification, each alert, each spike in activity felt like the countdown before an explosion. And then, finally, the intruder made the critical mistake. They attempted to access a core module they didn't understand. Helios trapped them instantly. Their actions were logged, encrypted, and flagged to Novacore's compliance team. I leaned back, exhaling slowly, but the adrenaline didn't fade. This wasn't just victory, this was survival. The intruder's identity was verified shortly after. They were suspended immediately. Novacore conducted a full internal review, confirming no damage had been done. Helios was secure. And as I stared at the final logs, a chilling thought struck me. Betrayal doesn't come from weakness, it comes from opportunity, and the greater the system, the greater the opportunity. I realized then that Helios wasn't just a framework, it was a test of my intellect, patience, and resilience, and the intruder had provided me with the ultimate challenge, one that I had survived, strengthened by every lesson of past betrayals. I closed the laptop, lights of the city twinkling beyond the window. Exhausted, but triumphant, I whispered to myself, "This is why I am ready, because no one will see me coming until it's too late." And in that moment, I understood the depth of the game. Recognition, betrayal, strategy, patience, they weren't just professional tools. They were survival mechanisms in a world where the stakes were global and failure was not an option. The calm, the recognition, the power, they all masked one simple truth. In this world, visibility alone cannot protect you. Awareness, preparation, and decisive action do, and I had mastered all three. The shadows of betrayal had become my allies, the invisible coder had transformed into something uncatchable, and Helios, my creation, reflected not just my intellect, but my resilience, foresight, and unbreakable control. For the first time, I allowed myself to relax, just slightly, because the real climax wasn't just stopping the intruder, it was proving to myself that no one at all could outmaneuver me, not even in the most sophisticated, high-stakes game. The game was won, for now, but the lesson lingered. Vigilance never ends. Power demands attention, and betrayal can emerge anywhere at any time. Yet, I was ready. I had survived betrayal, I had outmaneuvered genius, and the invisible coder was now untouchable. The days after the intruder incident were quieter, yet heavier with meaning. Helios ran flawlessly across global clusters. Metrics stabilized, reports confirmed optimal performance, and the client expressed unprecedented satisfaction. Novacore's board formally acknowledged my contributions, awarding me a leadership role that extended beyond technical development to strategic planning, governance, and innovation oversight. I should have felt pure triumph, but instead there was a reflective calm. Years of betrayal, ridicule, and invisibility had brought me here, to a point where recognition was public, influence was unquestioned, and my technical creations were integral to global systems. Yet the journey wasn't just about recognition or revenge. It had been about growth, endurance, and understanding the dynamics of trust, control, and human behavior. Family interactions shifted subtly. The same relatives who had mocked my simple coding job now approached me with cautious respect. Conversations about trivialities became discussions about technological insight, strategy, and innovation oversight. Armand was absent, professionally neutralized and personally distant, a ghost in the family narrative. But the lessons of betrayal didn't fade with professional success. They permeated every interaction, every decision. I realized that intelligence alone doesn't guarantee survival. Patience, observation, and calculated restraint are equally essential. I had learned to anticipate moves, understand motives, and act with precision, qualities that cannot be replicated by skill alone. The first moral truth crystallized: the underestimated often hold the greatest power. Those who mock, doubt, or dismiss you inadvertently reveal their own limitations. Every comment, every gesture, every slight provides insight into character, strategy, and potential vulnerabilities. By observing, learning, and documenting silently, the invisible gain the ultimate advantage: awareness. Second, betrayal is an opportunity, not just a threat. Each act of deceit, each hidden sabotage, each subtle undermining became a lesson, a strategic data point. I learned to convert weakness into strength, ridicule into focus, and underestimation into leverage. The very people who sought to undermine me had, unknowingly, taught me patience, precision, and foresight. Helios itself became more than a project. It became a reflection of these lessons. Every redundancy, every monitoring protocol, every anomaly detection routine was infused not just with technical rigor, but with the lived experience of human unpredictability. It was a framework resilient not only against external threats, but also against internal subversion. The third realization was subtle but powerful. Trust must be earned and constantly evaluated. Family, colleagues, and even allies in professional circles cannot be assumed loyal or benign. Vigilance isn't paranoia, it's strategic foresight, and discernment becomes the shield that preserves both personal integrity and professional achievement. Professionally, I leveraged these lessons to guide Novacore's governance. Beyond technology, I implemented protocols that combined system-level security with behavioral oversight. It wasn't enough for Helios to be technically secure. The organization itself needed cultural safeguards, transparency, accountability, and layered checks to prevent future sabotage. The final moral closure came when I reflected on Armand. His downfall wasn't about exposure or revenge, it was about choices. Arrogance, impatience, and underestimation led to predictable failure. I could have gloated, publicly humiliated, or dwelled on resentment, but I understood something critical. True victory is quiet, undeniable, and self-contained. External validation is transient, internal mastery is permanent. Even as I held this awareness, I knew life would continue to present challenges. Betrayal is rarely a singular event. New threats emerge, often subtle, often unnoticed until critical. But the culmination of my experience, decades of coding, observation, patience, and resilience, equipped me with a unique advantage: foresight. The invisible coder had become a strategist, a guardian, and a visionary capable of navigating complexity, ambiguity, and risk simultaneously. Beyond Novacore and Helios, this philosophy began to influence personal interactions. I engaged differently with family, colleagues, and collaborators. I listened more, observed more, and chose responses deliberately. Each conversation, each relationship became a microcosm of the larger strategy I had developed professionally. Subtlety, timing, and clarity replaced impulsivity and reaction. One evening, months after the climax of the intruder incident, I revisited the original documents, logs, and communications that had revealed Armand's sabotage. I traced the timeline from the first mocking comment at family gatherings to the professional fallout. I realized that every setback had been a disguised advantage. Each underestimation had provided me data, each ridicule a motivator, and every betrayal a crucible for honing strategy. The fourth lesson crystallized: adversity is the ultimate teacher. Triumph without struggle is hollow. Recognition without challenge is shallow. The obstacles, the betrayals, and the doubts provide the clarity, discipline, and strategic depth necessary to wield true influence. Looking outward, the world had changed because of Helios. Global supply chains, energy grids, and financial algorithms now ran more efficiently. Yet the real impact wasn't in metrics or revenue. It was in creating systems resilient to human error and manipulation, designed by someone who had lived the consequences of betrayal firsthand. My work had become a blueprint for trustworthiness in a world where stakes are monumental and errors have far-reaching consequences. I reflected on my journey, from a simple coder dismissed by family, underestimated by peers, and betrayed by colleagues, to a global architect, strategist, and quiet force. Every late night, every unnoticed commit, every subtle observation had built toward this moment. It wasn't luck or sudden genius, it was discipline, insight, and patience. And finally, the personal piece emerged, not from revenge or recognition, but from mastery over circumstance. I had controlled the narrative, preserved integrity, and transformed invisibility into authority. Helios thrived, Novacore thrived, and I, the once dismissed coder, had emerged untouchable, resilient, and respected. The final moral closure: visibility is temporary, but mastery is enduring. Skills, patience, strategic observation, and resilience form a foundation that neither betrayal nor circumstance can undermine. Those who seek to undermine will reveal themselves, and when timing, foresight, and preparation align, the invisible become unstoppable. I looked at my family one evening, their conversations filled with cautious admiration, and understood the subtle power shift. No words were necessary. Respect, recognition, and understanding had been earned, quietly, strategically, undeniably. And as I finally leaned back, exhausted but resolute, I whispered to myself, "The invisible see, the underestimated endure, the betrayed rise." Because beyond the technical victories, beyond the global deployment, beyond the accolades, I had discovered the true power of patience, strategy, and mastery, the kind that transforms betrayal into triumph, invisibility into influence, and ridicule into undeniable authority. And in that quiet triumph, I realized something profound. Every setback, every betrayal, every doubt had been a step toward mastery. The invisible coder was no longer invisible. The betrayed had risen, and the world had finally seen.